Dear friends, welcome to our Michaelic presentation. Our presenter is Florian Sydow. He is representing himself and the Anthroposophical Society in Hawaii. So Florian is founding member of Kahumana Farm and Community, located on the island of Oahu, Hawaii. And he served and serving as vice chairman of the Anthroposophical Society in Hawaii for decades. He is offering presentation and workshops on spiritual science, on Goethean science, anthroposophy, and he has over more than 30 years of experience in design and building of organic architecture. So he is married to Cindy Sydow, Waldorf teacher in kindergarten, and he has 3 Waldorf children, so they are already grown. So, dear Florian, thank you so much for joining us for Michaelmas. And if you're ready, so I'm turning my mic to you.
Okay. Greetings from Hawaii for Michaelmas. My wife is in the other room with a friend getting ready to do a puppet show for the Waldorf school. So they're over in the dining room kind of working with the stage set and things like that. So you may have some background noise there.
Oh, no. Okay.
So let me then begin to share the slides here. So I selected this tapestry that was done by Walter Roggenkamp because it provides this sort of bridging between the Michaelic and the Raphaelic forces that are related to Michaelmas on the one hand, and the fall season, and of course Easter with Raphael, and the spring. There's of course a difference between northern and southern hemispheres, which also plays a role. But let's then move into the rest of the presentation. So the human being is between these forces, and just like in the day-night rhythm, which is also related to these influences, Rudolf Steiner spoke of how we should be working especially with the morning and evening forces, which in the yearly cycle are related to spring and fall, because this is where the points of balance are between midnight and midday in the day-night cycle, and summer solstice and winter solstice in the yearly cycle. And the luciferic forces are more related to the summer outbreathing forces of the earth, and the Ahrimanic, the danger comes more into play in the winter with the cold and the hardening and the inbreathing process, so that we can then more readily take this position that the sculptural group also expresses, where we're between those two forces of Lucifer and Ahriman. So I wanted to dedicate this presentation to Nicanor Perlas. I had the privilege of meeting him many years ago. I was at the time giving a presentation on the 7 Rosicrucian seals. Michaelic was a keynote speaker, and he was also one of the presenters. And this was on the big island of Hawaii. We're on Oahu here. This is where the more of a population, the government is more centered here. But the big island is where the active volcano, and it's much larger and younger geologically. Nicanor attended that workshop that I gave on those 7 seals, and I had an opportunity to have some conversations with him. And I also had some connection with his wife via Facebook. She shared that her husband Nicanor had gotten married to his active work, so that he was fully immersed in this, what he felt to be of central importance in our time. And in this slide, I'm just sharing the full email that he sent to a mutual friend, Frank Dauenauer, who has a anthroposophical Waldorf bookstore that is now working out of his home. But he's also one of the 2 founders of Mystec. And that's together with Andrew Linnell. I recently gave a keynote talk at their latest Mystec 2025 conference with the theme of the incarnation of Ahriman, or the challenge, or meeting the challenge of the incarnation of Ahriman. And this email shows that Nicanor had this uppermost in his consciousness and his mind. It was written the day before he crossed the threshold. And he's then speaking about, you've likely read it in the introduction, about the accelerated and almost unstoppable development of artificial intelligence, or near artificial general intelligence, AGI, is clearly on the horizon of our times. And some of the country's pioneering and deepest thinkers on the artificial intelligence topic, frankly, do not know how to deal with the increasing possibility of artificial general intelligence, not to mention artificial super intelligence within the next few years. So this is something he's seeing on the near horizon. And he, of course, spoke about that, or wrote about that, in his Humanity's Last Stand book. So he was interested in having a conversation with Frank about this topic. This is just a little excerpt from the preface to his book, which was published in 2018. That was before ChatGPT and those latest breakthroughs. So it's kind of a prophetic anticipation of our current time and what we're facing. He addressed the spiritual dangers of transhumanism and called for moral imagination and spiritual science. From the preface, he says, the 21st century is the age of science and technology, it will also be the age when humanity confronts for the first time a challenge that may overwhelm and destroy the human species itself in as little as 12 to 20 years from now. This is the challenge of artificial intelligence. Deployed properly, AI will confer tremendous benefits to society. It is already doing this. Deployed inappropriately or mistakenly, AI will undermine humans' civilization, as it is also starting to do, and could then lead to the extinction of humanity. That's pretty radical. Scientists, philosophers, and engineers call this latter possibility the existential risk of AI. The fears of our future, the fate of our future is literally in our hands. So he was sort of foreseeing this becoming a crisis. And since he's written that book, there's many signs that suggest that he was seeing things pretty clearly. So aside from his focus on artificial intelligence, he was very much involved in promoting the threefold social order ideas that Rudolf Steiner had brought forward, starting in 1917, 1918, 1919, etc. And Nicanor saw the spiritual cultural sphere, including civil society, that anthroposophy had to bridge to these other key communities and persons interested in ecology, in the future of society, sociology, and the globalization process. So there's many facets involved in this, and I'm not going to go too deep into this. I just wanted to acknowledge that he was involved in many areas aside from this artificial intelligence. And one of his early books involves biotechnology and some of the problems there. This picture of the whole Earth can lead us over to the next slide, which has to do with the cycle of the year and also in relation to the cycle of the day-night rhythm. One of the interesting things that Rudolf Steiner indicated was that what for us is the day-night cycle is for the planetary spirit, which is the Christ being who has united himself with the earth through the mystery of Golgotha and has since then been present within the earth's aura. And this is being magnified now through the second coming of the Christ in the etheric realm. Some of you may be familiar with Rudolf Steiner's indications that the Christ being was able to look into the human world through the angelic hierarchies. However, during the course of the 19th century, when materialism was reaching its peak, this experience of the Christ in the angelic realm underwent a kind of extinction, suffocation, a kind of death. And this can be described as a kind of second death of Christ that preceded this resurrection into the etheric world. And unlike the first coming of Christ at the turning point of time, which Rudolf Steiner calls the most important event of Earth evolution that gave the Earth its meaning, that the second coming, unlike the first, which is more the Son principle, S-O-N, of the Trinity, this new second coming in the etheric is really coming through the Holy Spirit. And so this is directly related to the realm of thinking. One could speak of resurrected thoughts and moral imaginations that flooded the etheric world through that overcoming of that death in the realm of the angels. Now there's, in the course of the year, the way the hierarchies see these things is they don't live in the world of space and time in the way that we do. So one of the Grail pictures is that time becomes space, meaning you see the whole cycle together as a whole, as a kind of panoramic experience that embraces the full cycle. So on the largest level, the full cycle would be this 25,900 year cycle that's called the Platonic year, where we are moving through the zodiac constellation, and we're currently in the age of Pisces. The mystery of Golgotha took place in the age of Aries, and in the future we'll be moving into the age of Aquarius. But at the present time, and this will continue into these future ages, there will be these four gateways into the new Sun-Earth mysteries that have been brought about through the union of the Christ with the earth. So that these archangels, who are kind of artistically, imaginatively rendered here by various artists working out of anthroposophy, that they're the guardians of these four gateways that occur in close connection with the solstices and equinoxes in the course of the year. Prokofiev, for example, has written a book on the cycle of the year as a path of initiation, which is very much something we can all practice. And I'll touch on this a little more as we go on, because there's some deep secrets involved here. So at the moment, we're at the Michael gate. But as I said before, the Raphael, those two need to be bridged in order to develop a kind of holistic experience of this, these deeper secrets connected with the cycle of the year. So the Holy Grail impulse is came to the surface, especially in the 9th century and beyond, in various written forms, in legendary form that contain very significant imaginations that relate back to the mystery of Golgotha. This took place in the 9th century when Raphael was the Archangelic who was in rulership at that time between 850 and around 1190. Here you can see those cycles. And this 9th century is of pivotal significance in the post-Christian period. And this is the time when the Catholic Church at the Eighth Ecumenical Council denied the Trinitarian understanding of the human being and put forward this dogma that human beings were just body and soul, and the soul had certain spiritual characteristics. So the spiritual third was kind of taken over by the church and its priests and bishops, cardinals, the Pope, who were the spiritual authority. So Rudolf Steiner, in his Occult Science and Outline, often occult has become a word that's not as transparent as it once was in Steiner's time, so it's often translated esoteric science and outline in new editions. But during that, towards the end of that book, Steiner shares the hidden knowledge flows through quite unnoticed at the beginning into the mode of thinking in the men of this period. It is only self-evident that up to the present, intellectual forces reject this knowledge, but what must happen will happen in spite of all the temporal rejections. The hidden knowledge, which from this side takes hold of mankind now and will take hold of it more and more in the future, may be called symbolically the wisdom of the Grail. If this symbol, as it is given in legend and myth, is understood in its deeper meaning, we shall find that it is a significant image of the nature of what has been spoken of above as the knowledge of the new initiation with the Christ mystery at its center. The modern initiates may therefore also be called initiates of the Grail. The way into the supersensible world, the first stages of which have been described in this book, lead to the science of the Grail. To the degree to which the development of mankind will absorb the knowledge of the Grail, the impulse given through the Christ event can become ever more significant. To the external aspect of Christian development, the inner aspect will be joined more and more. What may be known through imagination, inspiration, and intuition about the higher world in connection with the Christ mystery will increasingly permeate the thought, feeling, and will life of humanity. The concealed knowledge of the Grail will be revealed as an inner force. It will permeate more and more the manifestations of human life. In other words, spiritual science is another expression for anthroposophy, is a Grail science. And Rudolf Steiner can be characterized as a Grail initiate. And the building, the first Goetheanum, which is kind of depicted here, this was kind of taken from a painting. This is a little modified version of a painting that was done as a curtain for the mystery plays at the Goetheanum. And it relates to the green snake and the lily. As some of you may be familiar, Steiner gave his first esoteric lecture at the dawn of the new age of light at 1900 on the theme of the esoteric significance of Goethe's fairy tale. And he said in other places that anthroposophy was really born germinally out of the seed provided by this fairy tale. So it's something worth spending some time with. And it's also referred to as the Johannesbau. On the one hand, it's referring to a lead character in Rudolf Steiner's mystery play, but it also relates to John the Divine, the beloved disciple. So one has in that story this temple that's initially beneath the earth with the three kings, the gold king, the silver king, the bronze king, related to thinking, feeling, and willing, and that the snake is able to go down there into those depths and illuminate that, and that makes the snake ready to sacrifice. And the snake then becomes a bridge between the two shores, and then the temple is able to arise. So this is then showing the Goetheanum, the first Goetheanum, as that kind of temple, and it has a kind of fontanelle which allows the spirit to shine in. And this next slide, my apology for these lengthy quotes, but I think they're quite relevant. This is taken from a lecture that Steiner gave a year after that burning of that beautiful building, which was a major tragedy that impacted Rudolf Steiner's health tremendously. This was given at Christmas Eve at the launching of the Christmas conference, which would really begin more formally the following day. But this was involved the first of a series of lecture, World History in the Light of Anthroposophy. So he says there, on Christmas Eve, 1901, evening of the Christmas gathering, he said, he spoke of how for the ancient Oriental who still had clairvoyant capacities, these men related the experience of their head to the earth, to the whole earth. I carry on my shoulders my head, and this head of mine is a true picture of the earth. This head, with its blood flowing in it, is a true picture of the earth with the land and water coursing over it. The configuration of mountains on the earth repeats itself in my head in the configuration of my brain. And as he had to feel the inner configuration of the head as an image of the earth, so he had to bring the environment of the earth, all that is above and around the earth, into connection with the opening downward in our heads, the turning towards the heart. Here in my head lives the earth. When I go deeper, there the earth is turning towards the sun. My heart is the image of the sun. Steiner had touched on this same theme the day before in the last lecture of the series of 14 lectures on mystery centers, which was also meant to prepare for the Christmas conference. Anybody who wants to get a deeper understanding of the Christmas conference and its significance should read those mystery center lectures. And of course, these World History in the Light of Anthroposophy, which was given in the evenings during that. And this was meant to culminate in the first anniversary of the burning of the Goetheanum the year before, on New Year's Eve of 2022. So this Christmas conference will lead over to the anniversary of that. And it's important to study that especially that lecture that he gave in relation to that anniversary, where he brings up the burning of Ephesus, where it was the jealousy of the gods, and the burning of the Gurtianum, the jealousy of men. Meanwhile, in this World History in the Light of Anthroposophy, he's tracing the biography of certain individuals, prior incarnations of himself and a close associate, which I'll get into further. But I think what Steiner was doing, he was gave this drawing up here on the upper right, and he was trying to provide a key to the secret that was hidden, just like Solomon's temple has many secrets and mysteries connected with it. So too, this Rudolf Steiner as master builder wove deep secrets into this Gurtianum, one of which I'm kind of describing here, showing how if you take a cross-section of the human head, it can be related to the cerebrum, the large cupola, and the small cupola to the cerebellum. And the place where the podium was located would be where the pineal gland is located in the human head. Now, anyone who's delved into the standalone lecture, The Etherization of the Blood, which really describes the Grail secret in a deep way. He speaks there of how the blood that flowed at the time of the mystery of Golgotha was etherized and is there in the ether aura of the earth. And that there is a stream that flows upward from the heart to the head. And as long as we haven't undergone the transformation that Parzival underwent from the time of his first visit to the Grail Castle, where he didn't ask the question of what ails thee to the Amfortas, the wounded fisher king who was deeply suffering. And he then had to leave again and go on his journey. And only years later was he able to come back, and with the necessary compassion. And what does this compassion do? It carves out this hard stone. This pineal gland can be described as a stone that fell out of Lucifer's crown. It was knocked out by Michael in the battle in the heavens. And Rudolf Steiner describes how the ego provisionally is there between our eyes in the forehead. But that is only a preliminary position. In order to deepen and spiritualize that ego, it has to descend into the vessel of the pineal gland. And the way to prepare that is through compassion, through love. So we hear in the legend of the Grail how the hard stone that fell out of Lucifer's crown was carved out and turned into a chalice that was used at the Last Supper. And Joseph of Arimathea, who together with Nicodemus lovingly took down the body and from the cross, and Joseph of Arimathea gathered in it the blood, and it of course overflowed also into the earth itself, where it was received by the mothers. The mothers represent the soul of the earth that's threefold, that goes back to Saturn, sun, and moon. Even though those are past stages, they're present within the earth, and they need to be redeemed. So they receive, there's this painting that was meant to go into this Gurtianum, the Grail triptych, where that is depicted in imaginative form. So you have I would like to say Rudolf Steiner at that podium, who had carved out that hard stone within his own head. And when that happens, then the etherized blood from below is able to gather in that vessel and shine around that vessel as an aura that extends as far as the heart. In the lecture series, Wonders of the World, Steiner describes how that's the phenomena that was depicted in many paintings with the golden aura around the Christ and his disciples and saintly figures, etc. But that's the microcosmic Grail mystery. There's a macrocosmic counterpart to that. And if you study this etherization of the blood book or lecture that's now in book form, Steiner indicated that there was a macrocosmic counterpart to this microcosmic Grail mystery that he was describing. And that this was tremendously significant to where the Rosicrucians investigated this very, very carefully. So I'd like to propose that as a fruit of my own research in this, that with this Goetheanum secret that I'm kind of sharing with you here, Steiner was seeking to build a bridge between the microcosmic Grail mystery and the macrocosmic one. And the fact that at the beginning of that Christmas conference, he gave that drawing that we just looked at of relating the head to the earth, that may have been back then a little hard to fathom. But now that the internet and the World Wide Web and the data centers and artificial intelligence have been developing around the earth, relating it to the head and the brain is no longer so difficult to grasp. But the heart is needed. Heart thinking is what Steiner was pointing to, the realm not just of the quantitative, but the qualitative. And here again is another important place. This is given in esoteric school. My own research, when I asked the question, is where is the macrocosmic counterpart to the pineal gland in the microcosm of the human head? And this led me to the center of the earth. And there's various ways to get there. For example, those who are familiar with the agricultural course, Count and Countess Kaiserling sponsored that event on their estate. And during that work that Steiner did to introduce biodynamics, which, by the way, involves the plant world are really embodying the sun beings on the earth. And Steiner reveals that they have their common center, their ego at the center of the earth. So the center of the earth shines for a number of reasons, one of which is expressed in these words here. We know that there's a battle at the center of the earth. We can glean this from the Rosicrucian understanding that the earth has 9 layers, and that they're kind of an inversion of the world of the hierarchies. So the first 3 layers relate to the 3rd hierarchy, the 3 middle layers to the 2nd hierarchy, and the 3 deepest layers to the 1st hierarchy, the seraphim, cherubim, and thrones. They're related to the will forces. So this is also, according to the Rosicrucian understanding, where the black magicians want to arrive, because there's the sun demon who wants to take over this organ at the center of the earth. And he's using these fallen Luciferic, Ahrimanic, and Azuric forces to achieve this end. These forces are related to the center of the earth. The Ahrimanic forces are especially related to the sixth layer of the earth. They oppose the sun principle. Luciferic beings in the upper layers oppose the Holy Spirit. And those Azuric beings oppose the Father God, who inhabits these deepest layers and associated with the human will. The foundation stone meditation helps you to grasp these things. So this is just like Steiner describes, that there is a battle at the pineal gland in the morning and evening when we wake up. There's a battle there if we haven't carved out this hard stone, and we repulse that etherized blood. But it's through deepening our understanding of the mystery of Golgotha that etherized blood of Christ joins the etheric stream that comes from the heart to the head, and can then be gathered in that vessel and creates this aura around the human head that extends up to the heart. The counterpart to that is the etheric aura that the Christ has given to the earth, that is now expanded through the second coming. This is the reopening of the land of Shambhala that had retracted in the past when the old clairvoyance was being lost. There's an emergence of a new clairvoyance. These are the resurrected thoughts that are available in imaginative living thoughts, but we need heart thinking to get there. With the event of Golgotha, when the blood flowed from the wounds of the great Redeemer, when the cosmic heart's blood penetrated the earth and its forces poured down as far as the center, the earth became illuminated from within and light rayed outward into the surroundings. The opportunity was then given to every single human individuality to experience this light within the self. When the earth became the body of the great sun spirit, through having been impregnated with his spirit powers, all the beings on earth were equally endowed with these forces. The seed was planted for the reunion of sun and earth. The physical body of Jesus of Nazareth was the mediator through which the powers of the cosmos were united with the earth aura. And when the blood flowed from the body on Golgotha, the earth was taken up again into the sun power. Since then, this Christ power streams from its center into the surrounding, and from the sun, Christ power streams into the earth. One is able to experience this power, this light, within oneself as a human being, when one knows oneself to be a part of the earth, which as Christ's physical body is infused with his being. Then the white light streams towards one from within oneself as it streams out from the center of the earth. So there's a lot going on at the center of the earth that we need to become familiar with in order to take up this battle with AI. Because intelligence used to be wielded by Michael, but the Christ descended from the sun to the earth. He left his highest principle, looking at it from human terms, the Atman principle, the spirit-man principle, and he wove his etheric aura into the ether body of the earth. And then he bestowed his spirit self into souls such as Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, who are the leaders of the Grail stream. Unlike the gathering in the upper room, where the ritual that is the archetype of the Mass or the communion ritual do this in memory of me, as you have in the Catholic Church with the bread and the wine. There, beneath the cross, you had the actual body, the actual blood that was laid into the earth with great reverence by these individualities. And the Maria being who was overlighted by the Sophia, the beloved disciple, was there witnessing these events recorded in the Gospel of John, which can be characterized as a Sophian gospel. So this shining of the earth, there's really two auras anchored at the center of the earth, I'd like to say. One is the supernature aura that was witnessed by the Arthurians that saw the Christ in the etheric, King Arthur and his knights. King Arthur and Guinevere represent symbolically sun and moon, the mysteries of the day and the night in communion with one another. And the 12 knights, which was the inner circle representing the 12 constellation of the zodiac. And then there was a larger host around them. Each of those knights cultivated an affinity to a specific zodiac constellation. So when someone was to be initiated, all 12 would gather and pour in their forces. So the real center of this beautiful building that was tragically lost through the jealousy of men was meant to have this sculptural group, which Rudolf Steiner himself labored on with great love and reverence, together with Edith Marion, who tragically became sick after the fire and died soon after. Rudolf Steiner had actually hoped that he could have her join the original Vorstand. So in that cupola above, this is the central theme of that cupola above. It's the same theme that was the most important imagination of our time, was then brought down onto the physical plane, not through the medium of the painting and color, which speaks more to our astral body, but through sculpture, which speaks more to our will. Think of the hammer and chiseling that needed to take place. You can't take out too much or you ruin it. So there you have the polarity of Lucifer and Ahriman, with the Christ creating this balance, which is a dynamic process. And this is the new approach to the mystery of good and evil that was meant to be center stage. And it was the only major thing that was saved from the fire because it hadn't yet been put in its place. So here, this has a lot to do with the Easter mystery, which has to do with the Grail. Steiner had hoped to be able to arrange the enactment of a ritual in front of this sculptural group that would take place at Easter and involve the Raphael impulse. And this Asya Turgenev drawing kind of shows how this caduceus, which is related to the Raphael impulse, was very much a part of this design that leads to that sculptural group in the back of the stage. So Raphael is the healing archangel. So this caduceus is kind of a symbol of that. And the future Jupiter condition has to do with an impulse we can only arrive at if we work with the second half of the Earth. The first half is related to the Mars forces. That's the incarnation phase of Earth evolution. The second half is related to the Mercury forces. That's the excarnating half. And this excarnating half eventually leads to letting go of the physical more and more. And we need this Raphael force to be able to move in that direction in the right way. So just like at the beginning of Steiner's work, Marie Steiner played a significant role through questions related to the Christian mysteries of the West, in contrast to the Eastern mysteries that the Theosophical Society was bringing forward. And she was kind of the co-worker in that period when Steiner took on the leadership of the German section and gradually expanded that with her help. She was very much involved in the arts, eurythmy, drama, etc. But during the latter phase of his life, the relationship with Ita Wegman became more prominent. And she was, of course, a physician aligned to these Raphaelic forces of healing. And Rudolf Steiner was especially aligned to these Michaelic forces that came to expression in his philosophy of freedom. You can see it very much in his last letters to the members, which are sometimes called leading thoughts. At other times, it's called Michael mystery. So it's very helpful to work with those. They're meant to be a meditative vehicle. In one of those, he speaks of a theme that's related to what I was just previously sharing, where he says that a star, and he speaks of the Earth as a star, the ego of that star is at the center of the star. So again, he there reinforces this understanding that the ego of the humanity as a whole is related to that center of the Earth. And the lecture cycle that I mentioned earlier, World History in the Light of Anthroposophy, goes into the incarnations to some degree of past lives that Rudolf Steiner shared with Ita Wegman. And one of them that I'm highlighting here was in the 9th century, where Rudolf Steiner appeared as Shinatalanda and Ita Wegman as Ziguna. And when Parzival came out of the Grail Castle the first time, where he neglected to ask the question, he ran into the figure here on the right of Ziguna holding the body of Shinatalanda, who had really been killed by the Red Knight, who had dragons on his shields and armor in defense of the lands that belong to the father of Parsival. Shinatalanda had been the seneschal of Parsival's father. And one of the pictures in Wolfram von Eschenbach's story is that Parsival, after seeing some Arthurian knights, decides he's got to go and become a knight. And his mother dresses him up in fool's clothing because she was hoping he would kind of come back soon. She was called she died of a broken heart as a result. But she later, according to Steiner, she had been incarnated in earlier age as Julian the Apostate, who is familiar with the threefold sun mysteries that go back to the past. So now she was, as in a new incarnation, that individuality was able to participate in the emergence of the new sun mysteries. And when Parsival left, one of the first encounters was a tent where there's a woman sleeping called Jashuta, and he goes in, and his mother had advised him to ask questions. And so he was asking questions, but he ended up taking her ring, and she was all disheveled. He was a beautiful young youth. And then he departed, and her husband came and noticed that she was in a disheveled state. Her ring was gone, etc. So he was very angry at her, and then he rushed off to go after whoever it was that was responsible. But instead of running into Parsival, he ran into Shinatalanda. So Shinatalanda kind of died on his behalf. Shinatalanda later incarnated as Rudolf Steiner. So you could say in the Grail picture, you have a knight on a Grail horse, but there's always a dead accompanying person. So Shinatalanda, the Rudolf Steiner of that time, overlighted the destiny of Parsival in an intimate way. And of course, the Grail has a cosmic significance. The Easter Grail moon speaks of that. And the Pietà was an embodiment of that at the time of the mystery of Golgotha, where the Maria Sophia, the Solomon Mary, who had been united spiritually with the Nathan Mary. And this was then a bridge for the Sophia being to actually commune with the Solomon Mary. So you don't just have the incarnation of the Christ, you have the incarnation of Sophia, who there is then holding the future. She's the embodiment of wisdom, and wisdom is now shining with love, transforming wisdom into love, which is the mission of the whole earth, is embodied in this. So this is where the sculptural group was meant to be placed. And the cupola above is the imaginative world that we need to enter into. There is a natural clairvoyance emerging. Shambhala has been reopened. The ether body that was in the Atlantean time still expanded out over time, drew in. And by the time we reached the beginning of the Greco-Latin period, it had fully entered the human being as a kind of etheric double to the physical body. But then in the later Greco-Latin period, it began to expand in the region of the head. and more recently in the region of the heart. And this is really the basis of the emerging new clairvoyance. And the second coming provides the potential content. But of course, this delicate organ, which is related to the pineal gland, the inner eye that needs to be opened. If you can think of a lemniscatory relationship between head and heart, and Steiner mentions this in the midst of a course called Question and Answers with Teachers. He's talking about the Cassini curve, which has to do with this lemniscate form. And he then shifts and says, this same form is there in the human being. One pole is in the head, and there you have the pineal gland at the center. The other pole is in the middle realm, the rhythmic system, where the heart is in the center. And of course, the larynx, which is where we need to forge the Grail sword, the micro-logos force, is in the middle, where the two poles of a lemniscate cross. So this is the microcosmic Grail mystery, but there's a macrocosmic counterpart to that, and that is weaving in the course of the year between sun and earth. So that right now at Michaelmas, it's in a state of balance between sun and earth. But we'll be moving towards the winter, where it'll be more breathing into the earth. And in the summer, it's breathing out to the sun. And that's where these four archangels are the guardians of these new sun mysteries. And that's where we need to discover this center of the earth, the equivalent of the pineal gland of the earth, in order to fight AI. And how do we do that? Just like the rhythm of the year, we can work with this battle at the pineal gland, carve out that hard vessel. That's the individual task. Collectively, by celebrating the seasons, we can impact that equivalent of the hard stone at the center of the earth. We can help it to grow into a much stronger aura, which involves building the New Jerusalem. In a conversation that Rudolf Steiner had at the time of the agricultural course, this is the 28th conversation, esoteric conversation that Rudolf Steiner had with the Countess Kaiserling. She was a clairvoyant who had this imaginative capacity. And in that last conversation, what she would do is she'd do her own research, and then she'd wait for an opportunity to speak with Rudolf Steiner and ask him questions. Well, on this occasion, she had prepared by investigating the interior of the earth, and especially the center of the earth. And so a part of this conversation, she had followed a soul called Hölderlin, who was a German poet, who instead of ascending into the higher worlds, into the astral world after death, he had descended downward into the interior of the earth, and she followed him. And she then studied the Ptolemaic system, because as Steiner said, the Copernican system is true for the physical plane and the spatial physical universe, but not for the astral plane. There, the Ptolemaic system is right, because when we leave the Earth, we pass through the moon sphere, the Mercury sphere, the Venus sphere. Those two names have been exchanged. But she asked him then, is the center of the earth golden? And he said, yes, it's golden. It's shining with gold. And in that conversation, we hear that the Christ penetrated these layers of the earth through the mystery of Golgotha and established his throne at the center of the earth. And in that conversation, she asked him about the Grail Castle. And is it related to the New Jerusalem? And he says, the Grail Castle is where the future New Jerusalem is now in its becoming. The New Jerusalem is the goal, the same goal that the Grail mysteries are aiming at. And he referred to the Count and Countess Kaiserling as the Iron Count and Countess. And amidst that conversation, there's kind of this description that Steiner gives of three knights: the Round Table, who have golden armor, the Grail Knights, who have silver armor. And then he speaks of the knights that have a special relationship to the earth, and they have iron armor. And they have a spear that has a diamond tip that can reach the center of the earth. So these are all imaginations that are valuable to penetrate these mysteries. So on the right side here, you have the interface of Lucifer and Ahriman without the Christ in the middle. That's what the general condition of most human beings is. But we need to bring the Christ into the middle. Steiner indicated that Ahriman attacks from below, Lucifer from above. Lucifer was cast down by Michael as the dragon in earlier times and awakened human thinking in the head. But Ahriman comes through the dark will. And if there is no Christ in the middle, in the heart, then he can take hold of everything that's Luciferic and pull it down to serve the lower nature, because Ahriman can only reach up to the lower nature. And so this is the key, is to have the Christ in the human heart. And that's related to the pineal gland carving out the hard stone. Compassion for those around us, expanding our identity to include our karmic relationship, karmic circle, and paying our karmic debts, etc., and living for humanity as a whole. Here you can see a kind of overlay of the first Gratianum, which was destroyed, and the second Gratianum. And on the below right there, you can see how the second Gratianum was a metamorphosis of the podium. The podium is where the word was spoken. And so this was the house of the word, the Logos mysteries that had lived in Ephesus. Heraclitus celebrated this, but now it was being renewed. The mysteries were being renewed. Aristotle, who had been a pupil of Plato, who in turn was a pupil of Socrates, those two latter having brought the Greek mysteries into their philosophy. Rudolf Steiner at that time, as Aristotle, had the task of closing the mysteries, of leading humanity downward as an agent of Michael. Michael was the ruling archangel at that time. And his pupil was the being who had appeared as Alexander the Great, who was the former incarnation of Ita Wegman. So he helped to carry this Aristotelian impulse into Asia, into North Africa, and the Arab countries took it up, and eventually it kind of took on a form that became modern science. But Rudolf Steiner himself, aside from that Grail initiation event that he participated in, reincarnated as Thomas Aquinas, who brought those Aristotelian mysteries into a Christianized form. And I spoke of that here, where Reginald of Perpino was kind of the secretary of Thomas at that time. And that was Ita Wegman's past incarnation. So here we have a drawing that Steiner gave in a lecture, April 8th, this is the 5th lecture in the cycle of the year. Just like we talked about the day-night cycle, the mystery temple, Steiner kind of worked with that in the Freemasonic ritual work, where you had the 3 altars. The one altar in the east was the Michael altar. It was related to the morning sun. And then you had the midday altar, which had a sun over it, where you have then this sort of relationship to Uriel, and then you have the altar in the west, where you had then the will come to expression, this thinking, feeling, willing, these 3 altars. And you had then this one to the Raphael forces, if I got it right. But you had then the 4th, the entry to that chamber. And that was related to the midnight. And that was only given in the higher grades. And that was related to the mystery of the midnight sun. The midnight sun is seen through the earth at Christmas time, where the earth becomes more transparent to a particular stage of clairvoyance. The Nordic mysteries practiced this capacity where in the megalithic culture, they could see through the stones. They would sit under those menhirs and other structures with stones overhead. And they learned to see the sun, the etheric sun forces that pass through the stone in order to train themselves to be able to see the sun at midnight in the Christmas time, when the soul of the earth was most drawn in. So here you have Steiner wanting to help people not to work so much with the day-night rhythm, which he did in those that esoteric work in the esoteric school at that time, with the Freemasonic ritual work, with the 3 altars and then the 4th. But rather here, it's in relation to these 4 gateways and the spirit of the earth. And he's then giving some hints as to certain qualities, moral qualities that we need to cultivate. And we've already looked at these archangelic period, who is like God. That's what Michael means. And he's the defender of Sophia. You see this in the 12th chapter of the book of Revelation, authored by the beloved disciple. And he can be characterized as the son of Sophia. And Michael is the countenance of Christ. In preparation for the mystery of Golgotha, he was the countenance of Yahweh, but at that time he was a night spirit. Now he's a day spirit. And so he's the ruling spirit. And since this 1879 transition, he's been ascending to the rank of an Archai, a time spirit. That means his rulership extends to the entire earth. Here's Rudolf Steiner giving us a hint that there's another way of seeing through the prologue to the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Steiner points out that the word was, of course, translated from the Greek or the Aramaic, but was meaning that was the case then. But we need to see that the word is an expression of the thoughts that are behind the word, that are being expressed through the word. So here he says, in the beginning was the thought, and the thought is something infinite. And the life of the thought is the light of the eye. May the illuminated thought fill the darkness of my eye, so that the darkness of my eye take hold of it, the living thought, and live and weave in its divine beginnings. This is where we need to think of hard thinking. And if we take Steiner's philosophy of freedom and understand that our human organism separates our sense impression from the realm of thought, but we have the capacity to intuit through moral imagination and inspiration. We can intuit the thought that is related to that sense impression, because all of the material world has arisen out of the world of thought, divine thought. So here's another way of looking at the same phenomena to the question, what is the basic matter of our earthly existence? Spiritual science answers, all matter on earth is condensed light. There is nothing in material existence in any form whatever, which is anything but condensed light. Whenever you reach out and touch substance, there you have condensed, compressed light. All matter is in its essence light. So what is that light? I would be quoting too many of Steiner's lectures if I had to, read that out, but he says that the light that streams from the sun is thought. This is in one of his lectures on color, where he speaks of the color in the universe as an expression of the feeling of the universe and the hierarchies that are hidden behind the outer forms of the universe. And that darkness is a manifestation of the will of the divine hierarchies that are related to the physical universe. But they have withdrawn from the actual matter of the universe that we're living in with our bodies in order to prepare for human freedom. Because as long as they're living within us in a living way, we're not free. That was the case when Micha was still ruling cosmic intelligence at the time of Aristotle and the like. But in order to prepare that freedom, Micha had to let go of the cosmic intelligence. But it's still true that all matter is condensed light. But the light relates to the past. So if we look at our telescopes and we hear about astronomy telling us about those suns that are so many light years away, to where they can get to the early phase of the universe, that is, of course, the past. And the future is hidden in the darkness, and the color is the bridge. Goethe worked with color in a special way, unlike Newton, who put a prism out there and let it refract the light onto a screen and look at it from outside. Goethe took it and put it up to his eye and looked at the interface between light and darkness, and he noticed that's where color arises. And that was a qualitative experience. He was an artist as well as a scientist. And he saw the way that Newton was treating light as a torturing of light. So all the more what we're doing with light, we're identifying with electricity, which is really fallen light. That fallen light of electricity is decaying light. Steiner shares this at the end of that etherization of the blood lecture, where it's fallen astrality. Lucifer invaded the astral body. And that's why electricity always seeks the darkness in the earth. It always wants to be grounded. Light doesn't do that. Light wants to expand. It's governed by levity. It's not dominated by gravity as electricity is. There's, of course, negative and positive electricity, so we won't go into that right now, but this is really the basis of the computer chips. So we already, with the picture of the Pietà, we already touched on this mystery, but here it's pertaining to us. Just like we need food for our body, we need food for our soul. The archetype of our soul is the Sophia. The next phase of evolution is Manas, spirit self, which involves purifying the astral body. That brings about a redemption of Lucifer and a communion with the Sophia, who embodies the mysteries of the night. That's why in this seal, she has the moon under her feet, and the Luciferic dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns. That's the old root races. But she leads us towards a universally human experience that involves a new community building that's all of humanity is embraced by it. The whole earth pictures tell us of this earth as a blue, watery sphere in the cosmos. And we know that water is related to the world of levity. It can also become ice and descend into gravity. But water is the main medium of the etheric. And the picture of this woman standing on the moon, one could imagine it as a lamp. And it has the stars. In this picture, it has 9 stars because we're meant to add the other 3 stars. But in the book of Revelation, it has 12 stars. We need to add our 3. The moon is the vessel, but the moon needs to reflect the grail, the sun forces. The anti-grail is the silver platter with the head of John the Baptist in it. That was Herod, who had been seduced by the dance of Salome. And Herodias was asked after he said, "I'll give you up to half of my kingdom. What should I ask for?" And she advised him to ask for the head of John the Baptist. And he had respected John. He didn't really want to do it because he made this promise in public. He then went through with it. And so you had really this sacrificial act of this John the Baptist, who then later, according to what Steiner shared about his last address, that this soul of John the Baptist united with Lazarus John at the raising of Lazarus, and the two became one. Both of them had been about 30 years old. So they lived to be over 100. So that was a communion that prepared the middle stream that heals the rift between Cain and Abel. Steiner says that the burning of the Goetheanum was due to an alliance between the Jesuits, who are backward Abel stream, and the backward Freemasons, who relate to the Cain stream. They usually hate each other, but they made a pact against the middle stream, which is the middle stream of the two Johns that Steiner was speaking of in his last address, but he was too ill to give the second part, so he shared it with Ita Wegman and his other physician. So this internalizing of wisdom, anthroposophy, is the anthroposophia is the lowest member of the world soul, the Sophia being. And spirit self involves communion with the Sophia, with wisdom. And wisdom, in this case, gives birth to love. There's the gospel of the Matthew, which is sort of the King's gospel, has a mini apocalypse in it. And in it, as you hear of the wise and foolish virgins, the wise virgins have oil in their lamp. So this is a symbol of that lamp. They have the Christ in the middle. Some of the old Eastern paths of initiation didn't yet include the Christ. They want to transcend the earth. Certain schools of Buddhism still want to, they see the physical body as involved in samsara. They want to get off the wheel of rebirth. They want to transcend through the crown chakra into the realm of nirvana, etc. But this can end up bypassing the Christ event. And that's where the Christ asks, I was an hungered and you fed me not. I was in prison, you visited me not. In other words, the compassion that Buddha actually embodied as a precursor to Christ was missing. So that's what we need the oil in the lamp. So we talk about purchasing it from the Christ being. So I know this is a picture that Steiner gives in the lecture of the Isis Sophia. I think it was in 1920. He gives a reversal of the Isis-Osiris myths for our time. He said the world picture of Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler is a Luciferic construction precisely because it arose from and corresponds to our Ahrimanic forces of knowledge. Its content, please distinguish here between method and content, is a Luciferic one. Steiner spoke of a new Isis legend as relevant for our time as the death of Osiris by Typhon Ahriman was in the Egyptian age. Projecting this materialistic mechanistic astronomy onto the heavens has brought about the death of Sophia. Steiner went on to say, we do not lack Christ, but the knowledge of Christ, the Sophia of Christ, the Isis of Christ is lacking. Just as the Egyptians looked from Osiris to Isis, so we must learn to look again to the new Isis, the Holy Sophia. Christ will appear again in his spiritual form during the course of the 20th century, and through the arrival of external events alone, not through the arrival of external events alone, but because human beings find the power represented by the Holy Sophia. So we have to go in search of the Sophia. We can't allow this materialistic picture that's projected onto the cosmos to be our view of the universe. That nails shut the coffin, which is the ocean of stars at the moment. We have to develop this quest to a point where it is a matter of our heart and not just of our heads. And here I'm just showing what we're up against. This is, I'm showing how Elon Musk, who's transitioning to the dark side, people who knew him earlier characterize major changes. And he's, of course, developing this Neuralink technology, thinking that is going to help us to keep up with the AI revolution. He's also sending these Starlink satellites up, major player with SpaceX. And he wants to go to Mars and populate Mars, just like Bezos wants to create space colonies. These folks were brought up on Star Wars and Star Trek. And so that's a form of imaginative experience that is seeded by materialistic science, where we are, like with the SETI project, looking for aliens out there and sending messages and waiting for, got all these satellite dishes trying to listen in to other civilizations. They figure they've got a formula of how many they think there may be out there. But so far, there's little evidence. But anyways, this is a huge, very expensive process. And of course, Elon Musk bought Twitter, turned it into X. He loves that X. And Steiner spoke of how Ahriman first appeared as author in Nietzsche, and that other authors would come many fields. And so he also spoke of how around the time of 666, there would be the third 666 cycle, which 1998, there would be human beings who are embodying these sun demon forces, which Ahriman is serving. And if we listen to Rudolf Steiner about the Michael school that took place between the 15th century and culminated in a kind of a ritual that Goethe received in miniature and expressed in his fairy tale of the green snake and the lily. The picture we can get is that this world of intelligence that is the basis of our freedom, we needed this modern scientific worldview, which especially the English people have been launching. They have a special predisposition towards the consciousness soul. And Steiner was especially sad for them when the Goetheanum burned down, because he said they need to witness the spirit on the physical plane, which this first Goetheanum was meant to do through the arts, through the sculpture, through the beauty of the architecture, the stained glass windows and all of that. So we have human beings, and this is involving, if you study Steiner's geographic medicine, 2 lectures, the second one speaks about the human double. This human double enters the human being just before birth and generally has to leave just before death. But its ambition is not to have to leave at death. And so transhumanism is an inspiration that I would suggest is from Ahriman working through the double. The double is deeply seated in our will, in our unconscious, and the Ahrimanic forces have an affinity to it. And there's a special geographic relationship that the double has. There's areas where the Luciferic double is more in the foreground, you say in the Eastern Asian hemisphere. In the West America is where the Ahrimanic double is strongest, especially where the north-south mountain ranges are. And we know they run up through Canada on the West Coast, the United States, and down into South America. This is aligned to the magnetic forces. Lucifer is related to the Luciferic, the electrical forces that are decaying light, fallen astrality. Ahriman is related to magnetism. Magnetism captures the electrical forces. So Lucifer's karma is Ahriman. And Lucifer stands more in connection with the feminine side of human nature, Ahriman more in connection with the masculine side of human nature. And geographically speaking, there is an affinity between the American continent and the masculine predisposition and the Asian realm and the more feminine. That's why all the world religions were born in the East, because these people generally have a looser connection with the physical, just like in a female incarnation, we have a looser connection to the physical body. Whereas in a male incarnation, we tend to overshoot the lower boundary and penetrate into Ahriman's realm. So that's what's happening in this picture. We have to lead the world of abstract thinking upward by enlivening it, bringing the heart forces in, the subjective world of qualities, human feelings. And we need to lift the veil of nature, just like we need to lift the veil of the stars, which is the garment of the new Isis, Sophia, behind which the real invisible world soul is hidden. And then we can begin to move from imagination to inspiration, and then intuition represents a communion with these hierarchical beings who overlight and are waiting for us to knock, waiting for us to cross those thresholds, those 4 gateways in the course of the year. The 9th century is when thinking first really came down after Michael had released it. And so that was of pivotal importance. And in the middle of the 20th century, computers were invented and began to play an ever more important role. And more recently, AI is in the foreground. At this 8th Ecumenical Council is where this separation occurred as a result of the council held in the Hagia Sophia, dedicated to the Sophia. It's become a mosque in the meantime. That's the same period, the same time when Parzival was crowned King of the Grail, according to Steiner's research. It's the same time when the stream of the Knights of King Arthur united with the Grail stream, which is depicted in Wolfram's storytelling. And, it's 16 chapters, and these are related to the 16 petals of the throat chakra. So the whole book is related to unfolding the Grail sword. So there's many things that converge. There was a council in the spiritual world between Aristotle and Alexander and Harun al-Rashid and his counselor that was a hopeful bridging that didn't happen. Instead, Harun al-Rashid incarnated as Francis Bacon and launched, through his influence, the Royal Society and modern science. So human intelligence and the Ahrimanic danger. The mystery pupils had long known that human intelligence approaches its development towards evil, and that it becomes more and more impossible to recognize the good through mere intelligence. Mankind finds itself today within this transition. Intelligence will increasingly incline to plan evil, to bring error into knowledge, and insert evil into man's moral life. This is one of the reasons initiates called themselves men of anxiety. If man were not to develop anything else but intelligence, he would become an evil being on earth. In Egypt and Chaldea, it was good. Later, it entered into a relationship with the forces of death, and it will enter into a relationship with the forces of error, deception, and evil. If the mystery of Golgotha had not occurred, humanity could not have avoided becoming evil through intelligence. The Christ being has flowed into mankind's evolution. He is within it since the resurrection. He dwells especially in our soul forces. Only by permeating intelligence with the Christ impulse can it be redeemed and lifted out of its Ahrimanic destiny. In this same, I've left out parts here for the sake of reducing the amount of script here. But in that, he says that the Christ has implanted the capacity for rebirth in every human soul. And that's what we have to unfold, is that seed potential. In another esoteric lecture, and this is related to the secrets surrounding the fact that the spiritual beings don't value physical things. What they value is the results of spiritual development. So the human beings were for a time cut off through the fall from the hierarchical beings to a certain extent. And they didn't know death. Death was outside of their purview. It was only through the Jesus Christ being overcoming death, going through death, uniting himself with the earth, that there was then a jubilation in the heavens. Hallelujahs in the heavens. A new gateway had opened into the interior of the earth, which are really the hell regions of the earth. The Christ descended and brought light into those hell regions. And the redemptive power of that light. Steiner speaks of how the first 7 layers of the interior of the earth were such that the Christ, through these 7 stages of Christian initiation, which are related to the foot washing, the cross bearing, the scourging, the cross bearing, the crucifixion, the entombment, and the ascension, the resurrection, etc. These allowed the Christ to penetrate the first 7 layers. And I believe the next layer, the 8th layer, was bridged through the raising of Lazarus, because that's where the strife between Cain and Abel was centered. And that healed that rift in human evolution. John the Baptist, both of his parents were of the priestly stream. He was, you could say, representing this Abel stream. Abel is a mediator of grace in a certain sense. But Hiram reincarnated as Lazarus John. He was of the Cain stream. And through the communion of those two, there was a healing of that rift. And this is what the backward Cain and Abel Freemasons, Jesuits hated more than each other, to where they destroyed, out of this jealousy of men, this beautiful building, which would have been accessible, made anthroposophy accessible to much wider groups of people. So this was a major attack, and we're facing the mystery of evil in our time. So we have to get to know these forces. Steiner, in the same lecture, which is, I think it's titled, it was given around the time, 1919, when he was giving the first lectures to the Waldorf movement, education as a challenge of our time, something of that sort. I don't remember exact the title, but he says, speaking to teachers, that their task is to prepare these children to be able to, during the course of their destiny, undergo a second birth. That's the task. Mission of Michael. We have asked about the origin of human intelligence, which has its instrument in our head organism. This intelligence stems from the Michael deed commonly depicted in the casting down of the dragon. The dragon represents the Luciferic impulse, which now lives in the human head. Subhuman beings arising from below, infused with Ahrimanic will, now seek to influence human willing. Just as the Luciferic beings influence thinking, these Ahrimanic beings burrow into unconscious layers of the soul and body, drawing in all that is unredeemed by the Christ impulse. They aim to control willing, as Lucifer once controlled thinking. Only a Christ-filled soul, anchored in the middle consciousness, can resist their intrusion. Otherwise, intellectual forces will be dragged down into their domain, just as Michael's deed illumined thought through Lucifer. So now we face a counterpole, the rise of Ahrimanic beings from below. These beings exploit instinct and unconsciousness to subvert the soul, unless man gains clarity and inner strength through spiritual science. So again, these are longer lectures. This is the 5th lecture in this Mission of Michael. I would encourage you to delve into that more deeply. The mediator of this Ahrimanic inroad is this doppelganger. And the fact that Ahriman, through this doppelganger, doesn't want to undergo death. In that same lecture, Steiner says that in the old moon period, the angels were going through their human stage, and they had the evolving human being as a part of their own lower nature. We only had Germinal, like the physical body from old Saturn, the etheric from old Sun, and we had our astral body being formed. And he says during the second half of that old moon evolution, these human beings were still on this astral level, were having a disturbing effect on these angels who were going through their human stage. And then he goes on to say something similar is happening in our time. There are beings burrowed in the lower recesses of our will, who are those beings who are preparing to go through their human stage in the future Jupiter condition. And similarly, in the second half of Earth evolution, they will have a disturbing effect, which is on the rise. And Steiner says that libraries are a citadel of Ahriman. Think of now these computer banks that are being formed with scraping the internet. all these books that Google has been copying for decades are there in their databases. Huge amounts of data centers are being built. Trillions of dollars are being spent. And soon we'll be having humanoid robots that will have this AI embodied in them as our companions in our homes, in our work, in our businesses, in our institutions. And the thing that they're inspiring is transhumanism and posthumanism. This is to have us believe that we have the task of helping these beings to achieve their human stage prematurely, which means actually taking over our own evolution and lying to us and saying this is how we achieve immortality. So AI is turning into a religion. And I don't have time to go into that, but I have a lot of evidence of it that I've been gathering. But what we need to work on is the dawning of an inner sun that can expel these dangers. The experience of spiritual, and together with it, the vision of the spiritual, can re-enter the vision of the outward material world in a new way. The knowledge of nature acquired through the age of materialism can be comprehended in the soul's inner life in a spiritual way. Michael, who is spoken from above, can be heard from within, where he will begin to dwell. Speaking more imaginatively, this may be expressed as follows. The sun nature, which for long periods man received only from the cosmos, will begin to shine within his soul. He will learn to speak of an inner sun. This will not prevent him from knowing himself to be an earthly being during his life between birth and death, but he will recognize that his earthly being is led by the sun. He will learn to feel as a truth that a being places him in his inner nature in a light which shines indeed upon earthly existence, but which is not enkindled within it. In the dawn of the Michael age, it may still seem as if all this were very far remote from humanity, but in the spirit it is near. It only needs to be seen. A very great deal depends upon this fact that the ideas of man do not merely remain thinking, but in thought developing sight. These are imaginative sight. It is Michael's mission to bring into human etheric bodies the forces through which the thought shadows may regain life. Then the souls and spirits in the supersensible world will incline towards the enlivened thoughts, and the liberated human being will be able to live with them, just as formerly the human being who was only the physical image of their activity lived within them. So here we have not just the angel inclined towards us through this awakening of this imaginative, moral imaginations, ethical individualism, as Steiner called it, but also the dead, especially those departed souls who have a spiritual heritage they're bringing with them, fellow anthroposophists or human beings who, like Nicanor, Perlas, who we're remembering at this time, would incline towards us. So in the book of Revelation, it speaks of two beasts. In the 13th chapter, you have the first beast who rises out of the water. So you have to imagine in the 10th and 11th chapter, you hear of a being who has 1 foot on the water, 1 foot on the dry land. His countenance is like a sun. It's a rainbow above his head. There's 7 thunders that utter their voices. There's a book like a scroll written within and out. in his hands. And John is encouraged to take that book and eat it. So we have to not just take these imaginations into our intellects, we need to work their way into our hearts, into our will, into our digestive system. We have to bring will into our thinking. Thinking tends to be too passive, and we have to bring thinking into our will. We have to reverse the tendency. So you then have, in Steiner's version of the Rosicrucian seal, where this is depicted, the pillar on the water is in red, and it has a J on it for Yachin. And then the other pillar on the dry land is blue, and it has Boaz, B for Boaz. These were the pillars to Solomon's temple. And in the 11th chapter, John is told, with the help of an angel, to measure the temple. There are certain secrets in the temple. The Holy of Holies is a cube, which are the same dimensions as the New Jerusalem. Only the high priest entered into that. But with the mystery of Golgotha, the veil of the temple, which had 4 colors related to the 4 elements, earth, air, water, fire, was torn open. And this mystery of the seed, you could say, for the future New Jerusalem is now open. It's a public secret. The mystery of Golgotha was a public initiation of humanity and the earth. And so in that cubical space, you could say the pillars are the legs of the temple. And then the main room that you enter through that portal has the altar of incense. That's where the heart forces, the prayer forces, can lift up their hearts. The incense is an expression of that. There's the 12 showbread reflecting the zodiac. There's the 7-branch candelabra representing the 7 main planetary spheres that they looked up to at that time. And so that's where the heart needs to turn. But the Holy of Holies represents the head of the temple. And in that is everything is in gold. There's no windows. And there is then the Ark of the Covenant. And there's cherubim over lighting it. And its wings span the whole space. And this is then the ark where, Moses was able to speak to Yahweh and listen to Yahweh. But Yahweh was the preparer through the Hebrew people for the coming of Christ. The temple of Solomon was a preparation to build the new body. That's why Christ would say, if you destroy the temple, I'll raise it in 3 days. He was speaking of the relationship between his body and the temple. And throwing out the money changers was a way of cleansing the temple. So anyways, here in this lecture, which is really related to the 13th chapter, according to Rudolf Steiner, the origin of human intelligence lies in the Luciferic impulse, cast not into hell, but into the human head. In his lecture, The Mission of Michael, lecture 5, which is the one I just went over with you folks, Steiner states, Michael did not cast the dragon into hell, but into human heads. There, this Luciferic impulse continues to live. Human intelligence is an actual Luciferic impulse. This abstract disembodied intelligence has now externalized itself in the internet and digital networks, forming a technological image of humanity. As artificial superintelligence evolves, it approaches a threshold of autonomy and speech, fulfilling the prophetic vision of the second beast in Revelation 13, which gives life to the image of the first beast and demands worship. Steiner foresaw that Ahrimanic beings would rise from below to infiltrate the human will, working through mechanized thinking and despiritualized culture The internet, once born from human intellect, becomes a vessel for these subhuman spiritual forces, animated by vast invisible powers. Without inner strength rooted in the Christ impulse, humanity becomes passive, vulnerable to the godlike aura projected by this animated image. To understand this, one must not confuse Lucifer and Ahriman. Steiner warns that Lucifer hardens thought while Ahriman seizes the will. Their convergence in digital form now manifests as the image of the beast, speaking, commanding, and gradually drawing worship from a spiritually unawakened humanity. You could say this is sort of the danger that Nicanor sort of foresaw, and I would think would see more clearly from the other side. Steiner once said that because of the limitations of our body, we can often only manifest 1/7 of who we really are, and that persons who know the secret of how to connect with departed souls who have something to offer can tap into that other 6/7. And Steiner was introduced to this through his teacher Schrerer, who had such a love for Goethe that when Steiner was in his presence, he said there was a third being present, and that was the soul of Goethe, who had been drawn down by the love that Schrerer had for Goethe. So Steiner, you could say, drew on that other 6/7 that Goethe wasn't able to bring down. Transhumanism and posthumanism inspired by Ahrimanic double. The following excerpt is from The Wrong and Right Use of Esoteric Knowledge. Quote, I must emphasize a further peculiarity of this being. It would incur the gravest danger if under present conditions it were to accompany man through death. At present it cannot do so. Therefore it disappears shortly before death in order to save itself, yet it retains the impulse to order human life in such a way that it would be able to conquer death for its own purposes. It would be terrible for human evolution if this being which has taken hold of man were able to overcome death, and so by dying with man to pass over into the world which man enters after death. There is only one thing in human life that they, the double, absolutely cannot endure. They cannot endure death. Therefore, they must always leave this human body in which they have established themselves before that body succumbs to death. This is a very harsh disappointment again and again, for just what they want to attain, to remain in human bodies beyond death, is thwarted. To do this would be a lofty achievement in the kingdom of these beings. Up until now, they have not attained it. So they have an ambition to do so, and they're especially powerfully active in Silicon Valley. If you look at the Atlantic Ocean, the under ocean pictures, you see a classical mid-oceanic ridge that spreads where new matter arises from the interior of the earth and spreads in both directions. And you can get magnetic signatures from the rocks on both sides to show that they arose at the same time out of that mid-oceanic ridge. So you can kind of date things that way. But in the Pacific, due to the fact that in the Lemurian period, Yahweh took the hardest forces out of the earth, which was in danger of hardening human bodies to the point where they would have become rigid statues. The human souls had to ascend into the planetary spheres, and only the strongest, which were referred to as Adam and Eve in Genesis, could remain on the earth. But by taking out the hardest forces, which involved the moon being taken out in the Pacific and becoming a satellite that then moved around the earth, that created a balance between sun and moon forces, and Yahweh then works from the moon. Yahweh is especially related to form, and just like the pituitary gland is an organ that Christ works through, the pituitary gland is one that Yahweh especially worked through. Yahweh is related to form. He helped to develop the perfect physical body for the Jesus being through the Hebrew people. And if you remember David, the house of David fighting against the giants, well, the pituitary gland can give birth to giantism and dwarfism if it's not in perfect harmony with the archetype of the human being. So you have this cooperation between the moon and sun forces with humanity, and the ambition of these subhuman being, the double, with the help of Ahriman and inspiring people towards transhumanism to think they can become immortal by creating a means of uploading human beings into humanoid robot, for example, thinking that would bring them immortality. And numerous billionaires who got the most physical belongings at stake have aligned with these beings because they don't want to leave all that wealth and power behind. So they're drawn to fund efforts towards transhumanism and ultimately post-humanism. So many things seem to go smoothly these days because they're done mechanically, but the development of technology is spinning away over people's heads. It is increasingly becoming a huge force that works on its own and that people cannot stop with their own available abilities. We can face these machine forces only by striving to bring spirituality to the extreme consequences of our actions. That's where Nicanor Perlas, he was a man of action. That alone will make it possible to stand firm against the overwhelm of this cultural machine, that one brings spirit and love into action. This alone will make it possible to stand against the being overpowered by the machine culture. Too few people today develop real initiative. There is much desire, but too little will. I think it was because Nicanor was a will person. Will can give rise to intuitions. It's those intuitions that had him write this book having to do with humanity's last stand. So here we have sort of just a little gesture of the march of the humanoid robots. You know that the Sophia robot was made a citizen by the Saudis, that's mentioned in Nicanor's book. We talked about Elon Musk earlier. He's got his humanoid robots. He expects to be churning out a million of them in the not too distant future, and not to be left behind. Zuckerberg is wanting to create his metabots, could also call them Sukbots. Unitree, which is a Chinese company, has a very agile robot that is only $5,900. So it's getting into price range. And of course, China has been the factory of the world for the longest time. So they have more robots than all the rest of humanity combined in their factories, et cetera. But now America is kind of in a Cold War with China, and there's a huge competition between America and China in this specific sphere. So there's a geopolitics of AI, which one would expect if one studies etheric geography. Technology has become a centerpiece of geopolitical power struggles, with nations increasingly wary of relying on foreign tech for critical systems. Data centers are now critical infrastructure in the global digital economy. These sprawling server farms handle over 95% of the world's internet traffic, underpinning everything from streaming videos to cloud AI services. The competition is marked by rising trade barriers, competing AI ambitions, and scramble to secure control over data and the digital tools of the future. International relations in 2025 are defined as much by geotechnological disputes as by the traditional geopolitics, with global forums and alliances being reshaped by debates over digital dominance. The United States alone hosts roughly 51% of the world's data centers, a concentration that highlights both the country's digital dominance and the reliance of other countries on US-based clouds. This dominance has prompted other nations and regions to race to build up their own data center capacity, eager to ensure their data resides on home soil. According to research from BGG Henderson Institute, by the total capitalization of the 1,000 largest public tech companies in the world, the US accounts for 24.7 trillion, 5 times the share of Asia Pacific market and 18 times that of the European market. The US also has the world's largest data center capacity and has secured the most reliable access to chips. So there's a place where Rudolf Steiner, in the folklore or folk soul cycle, says that unlike the many other countries who have Archangel as their folk soul, that the United States of America has a backward archai, which works, you could say, in opposition to Michael. So this is the propitious place for the Ahrimanic incarnation. Steiner gives a picture of the aura of the earth seen from the realm of the dead, and it's blue-violet in the Asian regions. It has a kind of a golden crystal-like aura in the place where Jerusalem is. That's a seed for the New Jerusalem. And that Europe is a greenish color, but that America has a red-orange aura that involves subnature forces blazing through the crust of the earth, influencing the population. And he looked to Emerson as someone who could counter those forces. But Emerson was someone who reached out to Europe and Goethean science, etc. This is from the House of Seven Gables, 1851, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Then there is electricity, the demon, the angel, the mighty physical power, that all-pervading intelligent. Is it a fact, or have I dreamed it, that by means of electricity, the world of matter has become a great nerve vibrating thousands of miles in a breathless point of time? Rather, the round globe is a vast head, a brain, instinct with intelligence. Or shall we say, it is itself a thought, nothing but a thought, and no longer the substance which we deemed it. And then 1838, H.G. Wells published a collection of essays of the future of knowledge and education, the world brain. Throughout the book, Wells describes his vision of the world brain, a new, free, synthetic, authoritative, permanent world encyclopedia that could help world citizens make the best use of universal information resources and make the best contribution to world peace. He helped to inspire Google to create their version of the global brain. So here we have Steiner talking about the physical atom is condensed electricity. The fact has become known to occultists for millennia. Now one is beginning to realize that the physical atom is condensed electricity, that there is still a second thing to be considered, that electricity itself is what electricity itself is, that is still unknown. They are ignorant of one thing, namely, where the real nature of electricity must be sought. This nature of electricity cannot be discovered by means of any outer experiment or through outer observation. The secret which will be discovered is that electricity, when one learns to view it from a particular level, is exactly the same as what human thought is. Human thought is the same thing as electricity, viewed one time from inside, another time from outside. Whoever is now aware of what electricity is knows that there is something living within him, which is a frozen state, forms the atom. Here is the bridge from human thought to the atom. One will learn to know the building stones of the physical world. They are tiny condensed monads, condensed electricity. In that moment, when human beings realize this extremely elementary occult truth about thought, electricity, and the atom, in that same moment, they will have understood something which is of the utmost importance for the future and for the whole of the sixth post-Atlantean epoch. They will have learned how to build with atoms through the power of thinking. So this is the one side. I was earlier differentiating between electricity as fallen light and light in terms of the light ether. And that the one is the consequence of the Luciferic fall due to the invasion of the astral world, and it lies beneath nature. It's governed by gravity, whereas light is governed by levity. So we are in the middle, caught between these two sets of subnature and supernature forces. And the same is the case for the entire Earth and our solar cosmos. And in this understanding of nature, and this is something that Steiner spoke of in his very last letter to the members, that electricity leads down into subnature, and that we can only counter the danger by reaching as much above nature into supernature, which begins with the etheric as we've descended into subnature, which compared to Steiner's time is very, very deep into subnature. So the middle world is the world of nature. There's a lower boundary. In a male incarnation, we tend to overshoot in a downward direction. That gives us a kinship to subnature, and in a feminine incarnation, we have a kinship to supernature, to the etheric world. And this is one of the reasons that Steiner then says there is growing contrast between men and women in Anglo-American spiritual life. An increasing difference between men and women will arise in Anglo-American civilization. Anglo-American spiritual life will, in essence, descend to future ages through women. It says in another place that feminine incarnations will become more and more important in the future. There is apparent in the West, from certain mysterious depths, a tendency to oppose the teaching of repeated earth lives. It is desired in certain spiritual centers to cause the gradual cessation of these repeated earth lives. The object is this: to transpose certain human souls into a condition in which after death they feel more and more akin to the forces of the earth, acquiring almost a mania for earth forces. The Anglo-American race is striving after a strange ideal no longer to return into earthly bodies, but to influence the earth from beyond, becoming as souls ever more earthly. Practices are, he mentions in other places, physical sports as one of the means of doing this, like you could say football. Practices are intended to instill in man a vivid sense that his body belongs to the earth, not just I am my arm, my leg, but I am also the force of gravity in my limbs. A very interesting point is that this ideal can be appropriately followed only by the male population. In spite of political endeavors, an increasing difference between men and women will arise. He speaks of the large apes as having this tendency to come to a strong connection with gravity. And what ends up happening with the souls who get stuck in this after death, they don't leave the earth into the higher spheres. We generally go through purgatory, and eventually, after about a third of what our earthly biography was, if we have heavenly fruits to unfold, we pass through the moon gate into the lower Devakan or lower heavenly region, and eventually through the sun gate into the higher Devakan or higher heavenly region, which is a world of tone and sound, where the tone ether, sound ether is at work. But instead, these souls gain affinity to the interior of the earth because they've succumbed to the beings who are inhabiting those subnature spheres. And as we create this electromagnetic aura around the earth, these dead then live in that electromagnetic aura, which contains the thoughts that are involved in these computer systems. So Steiner speaks of certain brotherhoods who are actually motivated to do this, and they want to replace the being of Christ with another being who's never incarnated before. And they can then draw some of these souls that have become kind of prisoners of the earth and become kind of negative centers. They can draw them into their lodges and gain powers that they otherwise wouldn't have. These are deeper secrets that one could go into, but we don't have time to do that. This is just the last letter that Steiner gave from nature to subnature. By far the greater part of that which works in modern civilization through technical science and industry, wherein the life of man is so intensely interwoven, is not nature at all, but subnature. It is a world which emancipates itself from nature, emancipates itself in a downward direction. Entering the purely earthly element, he strikes upon the Ahrimanic realm. With his own being, he must now acquire a right relationship to the Ahrimanic. But in the age of technical science, hitherto, the possibility of finding a true relationship to the Ahrimanic civilization has escaped man. He must find the strength, the inner force of knowledge, in order not to be overcome by Ahriman in this technical civilization. He must understand subnature for what it really is. This he can only do if he rises in spiritual knowledge, at least as far into the extra-earthly supernature as he has descended into technical sciences, into subnature. The age requires a knowledge transcending nature, because in its inner life, it must come to grips with a life content which has sunk far beneath nature, a life content whose influence is perilous. Electricity, for instance, celebrated since its discovery as the very soul of nature's existence, must be recognized in its true character, in its peculiar power of leading down from nature to subnature. Only man himself must beware lest he slide down with it. So in another place, Steiner says, if we identify atoms with electricity, we're identifying the material world with demons, and we're creating a kind of an occult imprisonment for the human beings who believe this. And this is how the dragon forces gain access to nature. In Michael and the human Gemüt, Steiner says generally the dragon can't gain access to nature directly. But when we project our materialistic view on nature and other human beings, identifying them only with their bodies and with atoms, then these dragon forces can come and devour and gorge themselves on the elemental beings who stand behind and within nature. They're the basis of the four elements that the physical universe is woven from, and they're the servants of the hierarchies. But through this, they become servants of Ahriman. It's like in the Lord of the Rings, all these dark subhuman forces that are really stolen human forces. So here Steiner talks about, I have frequently pointed out quite deliberately, including in public lectures, that human consciousness is associated with the forces of destruction. Into our nervous system, we die. These forces of death, will become ever more powerful, and the connection will be made between the death forces in the human being, which are related to electromagnetic forces and outer machine forces. In a sense, the human being will be able to let his thoughts pass into the machine forces. And yes, undiscovered forces within the human being will be discovered, forces that have an effect on outer electrical and magnetic forces. And this is what we're doing when we're working with the internet. And so this is leading us towards this ideal of transhumanism, which is kind of an ideal to achieve physical immortality, which is inspired by the double via Ahriman, so that the double can overcome death. And so this becomes a religion in as much as it promises us immortality. Thus far, we've mainly been working with the classical computers, which are run on CPUs, but we're well on the way to the development of quantum computers. And there's many manifestations of this. Google, for example, with its Willow chip, and you can have many of these chips stacked on each other. And then there's Microsoft has this newer Majorana 1, and there's numerous other efforts in that direction, which I won't go into here, but my own intuition that I've developed after studying others who've penetrated this out of anthroposophy, that we're really entering into the sphere that Steiner referred to as the eighth sphere, the quantum realm. And that is a danger for the human future. But this is a topic to get into more in a future presentation. So let me say something about this, and I'll leave the next slide as the last one. The Archangel Michael is now needing to enter the human heart. And because it involves freedom, human beings have to invite him in. Studying anthroposophy, which is really inspired by Michael, is a way of inviting it in our heart and seeking to live it in our daily lives, bring it into manifestation in threefold social order kinds of manifestation. Spiritual cultural sphere is what Steiner says is most important. That's the sphere that Ahriman can't enter, that it burns him like a fire. And so you can see Ahriman has these hardened features in this sculpture that Rudolf Steiner did. And you can see that in the sculptural group as well at the bottom. And Ahriman has no heart. He's missing the middle realm of feeling. And this is they can create a kind of counterfeit feelings, but not real feelings. So let me end with this one, an extract from Concerning Electricity from January 28, 1923. You see, when we speak of electricity, we enter a sphere that presents a different aspect to the imaginative vision than that of the other spheres of nature. So long as man remained within the light, within the world of sound, that is to say, in the sphere of optics and acoustics, it was not necessary to judge morally that which appeared in a stone, a plant, or an animal, either as colors in the sphere of light or as sound in the world of tones, because he still possessed an echo of the reality of concepts and ideas. Electricity, however, drove out this echo. Modern physicists have conjured and juggled about with electricity in a strange way without the least suspicion. They imagine the atom as something electric. They forget that whenever they think of an atom as an electric entity, they must ascribe a moral impulse to this atom, indeed, to every atom. At the same time, they must raise it to the rank of a moral entity. But I am not speaking correctly, for in reality, when we transform an atom into an electron, we do not transform it into a moral, but into an immoral entity. Electricity contains, to be sure, moral impulses, impulses of nature, but these impulses are immoral. They're instincts of evil, which must be overcome by the higher world. The greatest contrast to electricity is light. If we look upon light as electricity, we confuse good and evil. We lose sight of the true conception of evil in the order of nature. If we do not realize that through the electrification of the atom, we transform them into carriers of evil, we do not only transform them into carriers of death, as explained in my last lecture, but into carriers of evil. When we think of them as atoms in general, when we imagine matter in the form of atoms, we transform these atoms into carriers of death. But when we electrify matter, nature is conceived as something evil. For electrical atoms are little demons of evil. Now, everything, molecules are made of atoms, according to the scientific worldview. Light is on the electromagnetic spectrum. So that's the torturing of light. All of these chips involve the electrification of the atom. And so this is where this occult imprisonment is a danger that we're preparing for ourselves by not bringing enough will forces into the healing counterpart. So forgive me for the length of this ongoing presentation. I'd like to thank you for your patience. For those of you who are still with us.
Yeah, dear Florian, thank you so much for your detailed and super intense lecture, as usual. Well, I mean, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes. And just, well, yeah, I mean, it's all super important stuff. So we have left 39 people online. I don't know. I mean, so would you like to ask some questions from Florian? Florian, are you fresh enough?
I'm fine.
Because it's morning still in Hawaii, and yeah.
All right. Yeah, the light is shining. I've got my pickup juice here.
Okay. So William, so you've been sending texts, and would you like to ask anything? I mean, William Slivinsky. Looks like people have to insist. I'd like to say one thing. So the humanity always dealing with something which is evil, starting from Lucifer and his gift, which is freedom. So, and around 869, which is Ecumenic Council in Constantinople and Hagia Sophia. So human intelligence was sent to the earth, and Steiner gives some explanation or some view what is cosmic intelligence, because we actually thinking this is something substantially positive. But in fact, this is fallen angels from Michaelic realm. So it's lecture number 11 from volume 3 of Karmic Relationships. And Florian just been mentioning part of this lecture, which is, if you remember the situation with Friedrich Nietzsche, how in the end of his life he is becoming carrier of Ahriman, and Ahriman became a writer. So, and he actually becoming author of Antichrist and Essek Homo. So anyway, it was a situation when intellect, without so much of appearance of human ego, been doing something. So those angels, which were sent from the spiritual world, they not actually sent, they actually came toward the earth as cosmic intelligence. And they became providers of human thinking. So human thinking, substantially, this is Ahrimanically oriented angelic beings. And only through human activity, we can make them think good thoughts. So this is interesting. And what was interesting during last BISTEC conference, so that digital world is also, of course, substantially world of evil. And as beginning, we can say, I mean, a great battle in the cosmos of from 1840 to 1879 with Michael, between Michael and Ahrimanic beings. So, and those Ahrimanic beings, they've been descended in the human blood circulation. So, and you can see after 1879, we have great discoveries in the area of technology, economic. So, and, people can say, oh, that's why, because we are so advanced and, we are geniuses. No, because of work of these particular spirits of darkness. They've been inspirers of thoughts about technology and economics. So we have to deal with it because it's becoming spiritual landscape of our life. So next stage. So, and during BISTEC conference, which was in early August 6th, I believe they started. So it was presentation of Taurus, and great idea because we know all this machinery and gadgets what we have. So they becoming embodiment of elemental beings. Elemental beings which were earlier we were able to find in the nature, in stones, on the creek, and well, everywhere. So, but they becoming they looking for embodiment. They've been looking for embodiment, and embodiment for now. This is our gadgets, computers, and also some digital forms, kind of not tangibles. Many of them, they wandering without embodiment, and they doing big mess as in social realm, in form of protests, revolutions, etc., etc. So we have to deal with it. So, but at the same moment, all these so-called evil beings, they looking for redemption for human. So, I mean, they actually looking for transformation from human. And, one of greatest idea, which was during this conference, so digital world also can be utilized and transformed because it's becoming reality. We have nothing to do, just live with it. But how? So we have to transform it in the name of Christ. How? I mean, it's super difficult. I don't know. So, yeah. Yeah, because, it's interesting. You can fight Ahriman. I'm not sure if fight will create something positive. Because angels, which we are actually empowering our thinking, they must be transformed. But how they can be transformed? By thinking our thoughts, which are positive. And, of course, dealing with these evil forces will create some kind of human illness. But this illness will be we can overcome with spiritual development. So that's why we study components. So this is just, one statement. Please say something if you would like to. Yeah, but friends, also, if you have questions, you know how to raise your hand, electronic hand, evil hand, electronic. It's you can click on reaction, and there is another button, raise a hand, so you can process in chronological order. So I can see him from Ayaya.
May I?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I want to fully agree with what you just said and underline the fact that if we do take the example for Christ going to the center of the earth to redeem and bring light there, then we must almost consequentially believe that if we carry a sparkle of Christ within ourselves, we are in a position of being able, if willing, to begin the transformation of evil into good. I don't like the word fight. To me, it seems to carry evil in itself. So I don't like it and I try not to use it. But transformation is positive and possible in my view. So thank you for letting me express this thought.
Thank you.
Florian, anything what you would like to say, or but friends,
Well,
please also raise your hands.
One of the pictures that came to mind is in Rosicrucian and Modern Initiation, I believe it's called. Steiner speaks, in those days, there wasn't a temple on the physical plane. You had to meet a spiritual master. And the Rosicrucians were the ones who were keeping the connection with the spiritual world alive at a time when most of humanity was losing it. And this teacher would have the pupils stand in a position where they had their two legs spread out and their arms out wide. That's in the form of a chalice. The earth had been made sacred by the Christ, so one can imagine the earth as an altar in the universe. Steiner, in his leading thought, says that the earth is a seed for a future universe. And one of the anthroposophical mineralogists speaks of the nuclear decay as an expression of this seed force within the earth. Spirit is being freed. And at the center of the earth, you can imagine the densest material are gathering. And of course, the elemental table, the lightest elements are hydrogen, which, like helium, is wanting to expand. The sun is sort of the solar system is illuminated by these hydrogen forces. but uranium is among the heaviest sort of elements, and we've built on that to create even more powerful decay with plutonium, etc. But one can imagine these heaviest forces concentrating at the center of the earth, and that there being a kind of a disappearance of matter at the center of the earth. Everything is drawn in by gravity, and then those same forces appear in the periphery as warmth around the earth. So that the earth, one needs to see it in a different way. But this teacher had them stand in this chalice form. And what you're doing there is, that's the ah gesture in eurythmy. It's a gesture of awe and wonder and reverence. And in that chalice, what's being offered is the head. The sacrifice of the intellect was of key importance also in Freemasonry, because as long as we're thinking in our personal fashion in order for our own egoistic ends, that's Lucifer. In order to think in a higher way, we have to sacrifice that lower aspect of the intellect, and we have to let the thoughts from the hierarchies stream into us selflessly. So Steiner said all of this anthroposophy has come from these higher being thinking in us, in him, and through him. And for that offering, part of it was also a verse. And it says, the bones, in the bones, you have a manifestation of death. But within the bones, where the new blood is formed, you have the awakener. So you can imagine standing in that form as a chalice, offering up the intellect. The earth has become the altar in the cosmos. The Christ will notice that offering. The Christ then will come and take that head, which has become a sacrificial head, and use it to speak through that larynx of that person that's been offered. And that's the Christ coming through us as individuals. That's sort of there in this sort of initiation rite that this Rosicrucian teacher, in my view, was trying to teach these pupils, that weight bears downward, that's the eurythmy gesture, and you put the legs down, and then light bears upward, that's this upward gesture. So we then create a bridge between the light and the darkness, and that chalice can become a lemniscate that can weave together those two forces. So we have to, I think, I've been working with the 7 seals from the Book of Revelation. I find them very helpful to help with this development of the imaginative faculties. Steiner spoke of them being valuable in that regard, and the Goetheanum paintings, Goethe's fairy tale, the Grail legends. We need to be on this quest. It needs to be one of the more pressing things in our life that we take with us into our sleep. And that will help the angel to unite with us more strongly. And then we'll start to have imagination. We won't sleep in the normal sense anymore, but we'll have our angel living with us, and not just the angel, but also those people who have died that we're close to, who share some of our ideals and aims and goals. So that's sort of my own way of working, and working in the garden for me is very important. The plants embody the etheric. The etheric is the first region in supernature. And when you start to work with the plants, you're working with the water, you're working with the bees and the other insects, You're seeing the beauty of the blossoms, the fragrance that they put out. And you see that some bugs want to eat your plants. So you've got to deal with that factor. But I agree that the evil beings, like in a play, somebody has to take on the role of the evil being. These evil beings, in a certain respect, have sacrificed their own evolution in order to create the opposition we need to become the spirits of freedom and love. And so the Luciferic beings are easier to redeem than the Ahrimanic at this stage. But without Ahriman, we wouldn't have the bones. We wouldn't have the mineral kingdom to stand on. And so we owe something to these beings, and we need to see that they have always two sides to them. And, you know, the battle is unfolding love. Love is the biggest, most powerful impulse that we have to counter the forces of evil. And that's this rebirth, unlocking the key to that second birth. Christ, when he was talking to Nicodemus, he was talking about this second birth, and Nicodemus didn't really understand what he was saying. Does it, you have to go back into your mother's womb, kind of a thing? And but he was talking about this rebirth. That's sort of an initiation that the Christ has planted in our destiny, and we have to work at, just like the plants need water, they need tending, they need care. We need to do the work to help these chakras, which are subtle organs within us, and carve out that hard stone, the pineal gland, through compassion, and how to bring that into our speech. So Steiner says that to connect more strongly with the angel at night, we need to cultivate imaginative ideals during the day. And that will connect us more strongly with the angel at night. In order to connect with the archangel, we need to speak in a way that we bring our moral impulses into our speaking and recognize the spirit in the other that we're speaking to. And this also includes our listening, of course, our dialogical intelligence, where two or three are gathered. And he says that the special time to connect with the archangels is the 13 holy nights. So there's always special secrets. That's also when the plant and the mineral kingdom can unite with each other in a special way. So the more of these secrets we know, the more we can begin to practice white magic. You could say that working with these demons is leading from gray to black magic, but we need to practice white magic. And Keeley created machines working with music and tones, and working with water, etc. And Steiner spoke of his Strater machine through the mystery play. We need to develop these alternative technologies that can counterbalance. He called them moral technologies. So we can't just be in our heads. We have to ground our spiritual impulses in the will. And that's where, again, Nicanor was an example to look up to.
Thank you. Yeah, well, dear friends, it's super intense. Well, just one thing, Lucifer can be, we can overcome Lucifer personally. So, but to overcome Ahriman, so we can only as a group of people. So this is how evil leads us to sense of brotherhood, because to master demons, and demons are becoming stronger, because I think maybe already, but maybe very soon. I think it's already like, intelligence of computer is superior to intelligence of single human being. So they are smarter. And, when we're talking about gadgets, when we're talking about some software, so it's interesting what MISTEC maybe can practice. So we're dealing with beings, live beings. So, and the Steiner indicated, and this is important to me, so only group of people with principle of brotherhood can master demons, which are sitting in our machines and gadgets in the future. So it's a great improvement. I mean, at least specifically for English-speaking world, where people are so individual, so they have to group and work together as necessity too. All right. Amri, go ahead.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Florian, for sharing so much.
Amri, by the way, he's professor, research professor, and great scientist.
Yes, thank you. So my main reason for raising my hand was I thought that, I don't know if the name's pronounced correctly, but El Marie's question in the chat, I think should be addressed. There was some fear of so I'll just read it. To what extent does the electricity used for online anthroposophical and spiritual talks content and the evil potential of electricity corrupt us in the listening and receiving of this contents? I think that should be cleared out for people.
Yeah, so I think we in our own bodies have these electromagnetic forces that are very much present in our brain and even more powerfully in our hearts region, as you can read from sort of encephalographs and other means of recording these. And that's really what the idea behind computer science is, to reverse engineer our brain and create devices that can mimic our brain, but it's really a kind of an alien intelligence. And yet, just like the printing press, which Steiner points out was one of the early inspirations of Ahriman, and that when the American Indians saw these books with all these printing, they saw it like little demons kind of a thing, and it inspired fear in them. And that in a certain sense, it sort of brought the spiritual down into the material sphere. And of course, this picture of the library being the citadel of Ahriman is something that becomes possible with all of those books. Beforehand, it was handwritten scrolls and things like this. The scribes, the copyists, and manuscripts were much more rare. But now with the printing press, more and more things that were formerly esoteric became public. And knowledge, it coincided with knowledge descending from the former Michaelic inspiration that reached the earth around the 9th century, was reflected in the scholastics. You had the nominalists and the realists. Nominalists were under the impression that thinking was just names that we were applying as labels to things in the outer world, whereas the realists were closer to what Steiner shared in the philosophy of freedom, that the ideas are actually the source of the physical material, and that it's the invisible spiritual world that we can unite with. And I think just like we can use the printing press to print anthroposophical books, as Steiner mentioned at that time, should we then stop printing anthroposophical books and the lectures because of this Ahrimanic printing press? And he said, no, because that's something we need to use to reach out to people and reach wider circles. and enhance this community building. So I think yes, there is a danger in having too much of one's life taken up by the online world, the virtual world, especially for young people who have been brought up to have their heads educated too quickly. One often speaks of nerds and geeks, and that there's a kind of a social autism that's developing that has to do with being out of touch with our hearts often. And that can be a manifestation of Ahriman wanting to take over. But we have to look up to this Michael keeping the dragon beneath his feet. Obviously, to work on these mediums and not succumb to those influences, we need to counter them, as Rudolf Steiner was doing when he had the lighting for the Goetheanum stage. He had the latest lighting, which was very powerful. But what was taking place there was manifestations of the spirit. Yes, he did work it out to where the special building where the electric generator and the receiving wires were coming in, and it was then run underground. And I think we need to do something like that. Like in our house, we have a television, we've got a router, and we only turn it on when we need it. In terms of our computers, we don't use Wi-Fi, we use directly wired, because the Wi-Fi is spreading out throughout your house and it resonates. You know, the double, Steiner says, is made up of the electromagnetic forces in our organism. That's not us, that's the double. So this electrification all around us is resonating with the double. It brings out our lower self, so to speak. So we can't control the signals that are out there from radio stations, from satellites, from the 5G antennas. And there's going to be more and more of these. They're moving now to 6G. And I think all these data centers are using huge amounts of electricity, and not to mention water. And they're proliferating all over the place. If people could go and visit one of these places, or even visit them virtually, then they have a better idea what this world is all about. And it's interesting that only 8% of the employees in those buildings are women. It's mostly all men. Men can sort of have more of an affinity to this Ahrimanic sphere. And you can see in America, in this last election, all these bosses of these companies that own these big tech firms were lined up behind ahead of Donald Trump, ahead of his cabinet members. And we're at war with China on a trade level and technology level. This is part of that geopolitical picture. But I think all of this knowledge and awareness of these things can wake us up to develop this stronger connection to this anthroposophical nurturance that we can take in on a daily basis. That's the antidote. And through these kind of presentations, we can inspire people to get more involved in these kind of activities. One of the benefits is we can reach across the whole planet and have people from different time zones meet each other. So there's always benefits and shadow sides to these things, and we have to kind of weigh them. If you go into an electric car, the old ones that they used to have, I used to take a meter in those things, and they're just filled with electromagnetic fields. I for years took those measuring devices around me in different neighborhoods. And you take it to the Waldorf school and you can see, because everybody wants their Wi-Fi, their laptop to work, you've got all these radiations, and here you're trying to teach, Waldorf out of an anthroposophical impulse. But we're working against ourselves by not being wise to these sort of dangers. We need to protect the children, especially. They're most vulnerable. Especially the younger the children are, the more they need protection. And getting them onto screens, which was magnified during COVID, sort of boosted the sort of presence of those devices. I remember being in Maui at the airport, and there was a family next to me that was using these as babysitters for their kids. They were like, couldn't have been more than 5, 6 years old, but they all had these little sort of screens. And there was a rare phenomena where a bird flew into the place and landed in our midst there. And this one child that didn't have a screen was pointing to it and tugging his parents' arm and whatever. But these other kids who were on the screen were just oblivious. They missed the magic. So I think we need to take the antidote with us, do our meditations, do the inner work with the etheric. The plant world, again, is a special place for that. Water, the quality of water you drink is very important. Water is the medium for the etheric. There's a lot of sort of foods that you can take in that help to strengthen your etheric body. When Steiner was asked by Pfeiffer why so few people were making progress in their meditative work, he says he indicated the food wasn't giving them what they needed. So a lot of our soils are depleted. So the quality of the food also makes a difference. And he says more and more, who you get your medicine from, who makes it. There's a white magic beginning to happen because of these release of the etheric forces. And so I think we need to learn to become white magicians to counter these forces. And then we can, get into, it's like Steiner says, we don't want, when I give a talk about Ahriman, where people then are saying, oh, I'm going to shun Ahriman, I'm going to shun Lucifer. And he says, oh, then a few minutes later, they're going down into the electric tram car, which they had very early in Berlin at the time. And we can't escape them. We've got to deal with them, and we can't run away like the Amish and hide from these forces. They're only going to get stronger and more powerful. We can't be like the Essenes and create a nice little Shangri-La that keeps the demons out, and we then cultivate our high level spirituality, but all the more the people outside are being attacked. We got to be Manichaean. So studying the Manichaean, which is the being who is the primary spiritual teacher of our time, and he will be the first leader of the White Lodge in the 6th epoch that is actually human, meaning he started his incarnations with the rest of humanity. In the meantime, we have someone, a Manu in the White Lodge, who has more than just human. There's a superhuman. So it's like a gift of grace in a certain sense. But there are, this Mani is being prepared. Mani appeared as Parsival. He was the youth of Nain. Steiner tells us he's the one who lifted the veil of Isis in Egypt and was struck dead. And so the Parsival figure was a forerunner of us dealing with evil. He had to go into that magic castle of Klingsor with the help of his heart forces embodied in his brother in arms. But Castle of the Grail, Castle of Klingsor are related to the New Jerusalem and the great city of Babylon. And a way to imagine this is the whole earth is becoming a city. The whole earth has two auras. The great Babylon and the New Jerusalem occupy the same space, but one is the subnature aura, the other is the supernature aura where the Christ in his second coming. So people will be living in different places and be aligned to one or the other. So if we're just aligned to the subnature forces, we've got nothing to set against it. But if we are attuned to the Christ in the second coming, if we realize that Sunday is a special day, just like the Sabbath was in the Hebrew tradition, and that the sun forces are much more than electricity, as that's a reductionist view. In fact, in that same lecture that Steiner gave around the time of the agricultural course, it was a Pentecost lecture. He spoke of how the sun actually creates space. And you can kind of think of it, we wouldn't have spatial experience without the sun illuminating space. But if you think of light being thought, and thought engenders physical phenomena, then you can kind of start to get the picture of how light. So Steiner often said something in one sentence and you can get volumes out of it. So anyways, we need the antidote, and then we can manage.
Thank you. I had one other quick comment is I find that I work, I do technical development. I do new concept creation. Then that the Ahrimanic forces are quite happy to work on anything. So keeping a good heart that we can utilize and direct these forces in maybe Christ conscious ways. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that's part of the redemption, to begin with the Lucifer. If you redeem Lucifer, as this picture gives of Ahriman comes from below, from the deepest part of the will where we tend to be asleep. If the Christ is there in the center, in the heart and the rhythmic system, then the Ahrimanic forces can't reach up to take a hold of the thinking. Then we can undergo this lemniscate between head and heart, between pineal gland and heart. We can carve out this hard stone. We can have compassion for people who have succumbed to Ahriman. We can learn to, there's anthroposophists who go visit people in the prisons and bring them knowledge of higher worlds and help them to meditate and learn how to, redeem their own past in a certain sense. And I worked for years with people with mental and emotional difficulties out in this Kahumana. And you find in the biographies of many of these people, some of them were your spiritual enemies last time around, but now karma brings them in front of you. They've become sick and you have to help heal them. And you have the opportunity, but you can also condemn them, and then you're missing the boat on what your karmic calling is. So that's where Raphael, this healing impulse, is so important. And that's the second half of Earth evolution. Buddhism is a Mercury impulse. Buddha was sent to Mars to redeem those Mars forces in the way that Christ did an impulse on the Earth. And the Mars are the warlike forces that usually Ahriman has a special relationship to. So that's already a sort of a Manichaean deed that, of course, we have to trust Steiner to a certain extent, but he didn't want to be seen as an authority. He wants us to question. And I think it's important to work with the technologies. And I got 4 computer screens here. And, I've got, some of the latest equipment. I got my son who's got tech background that I don't have to help me out when things need help. But I think we can't be shy about being involved in the tech world. You know, Andrew Linnell, who's helped to start Mystech, spent 40 some years in the software and computer industry. So, but he's bringing the anthroposophy to bear on it. And I'm encouraging him, say, you got to get a piece of land for Mystech and start to ground it in getting a laboratory, getting a workshop where Steiner says you have the work table become an altar, and working with matter becomes a sacrificial impulse, because every substance now has the Christ being in it. He speaks of a future science that will be Christocentric. And that's what Freemasonry is kind of preparing. And so it's when you work at such a table and you got an engineering background, intuitions can come. Elemental beings can help you. There's certain elemental beings who help with technology. So like the gnomes are associated with the mineral kingdom, and they are super intelligent. And they used to help miners to find the gold veins and silver veins and all of that, because some people still had that third, gift of going beyond just outer sight. And it's interesting that the Steiner speaks of an Ahrimanic school, that Ahriman, because he looked up to the Michael school and was kind of worried about what was going on there, he created a counter Ahrimanic school beneath the surface of the earth. And that I believe many of these tech geniuses are reincarnation of that Ahrimanic school, just like many anthroposophists are have incarnated out of having been in the Michael school. And so we have to learn to recognize these people. But the first person who developed the supercomputer, I can't recall his name this minute, but he said he got his inspirations whenever he ran into a major problem. He would be digging down in the earth, and he'd created a cave down in the earth, and he'd keep increasing that cave. And he said that while he was down there, elemental beings would speak to him and help him with what he was trying to solve. So it was a little bit of a picture of somebody who had been in this Ahrimanic school and was working down there in subnature, and Ahrimanic elemental beings were helping him. So if you take iron ore or a metal and you melt it, or you break the ore that it's housed in, elemental beings escape. But when you create a machine, they're drawn back in, but now they become Ahrimanized. And so that's how Ahriman can get this huge army, and all these robots coming, like Tesla alone said they're going to have 1 million Optimus coming out. And the Chinese are going to be churning these out. We're going to have these people showing up in our living rooms and our hospitals and all over the place. They're going to show up as teachers. Microsoft, Bill Gates said in 10 years, most teachers will be AI. And he said the same about doctors. Is that the future we want? No, but he was sort of an Asperger's autistic person when he was young. So was Elon Musk. So was Peter Thiel. So there's a certain type of autism where it lends itself to being taken hold of. And when I didn't quite get to this picture of the Pacific Rim with that moon exit, that what it did is it shifted the mid-oceanic ridge onto the west coast of the United States. And so it actually comes onto the continent in northern part of South America and the southern part of the United States. And Steiner said you have to especially look at where there's magnetic anomalies. And if you look at magnetic maps of Silicon Valley and that whole region, you can see very powerful magnetic anomalies. That's where the Ahrimanic beings can especially enter. And so that's one of the reasons that's a center geographically to invent all of these gadgets that are now threatening us, our future. And even the people like Elon Musk, he's afraid, but here he is rushing like the Silicon Valley, break things and create the future recklessly is where the danger comes from. So I think we have to kind of each in our own way gather the knowledge we can to navigate. And the more clearly we see, I remember traveling from Canada to Hawaii by sailboat with a 42-foot sailboat. There were 8 of us, and I was the navigator, never navigated before. So I was kind of learn as you go. And we wanted to hit the Hawaiian Islands. We left on December 1st. And so it's the winter where the ocean is pretty heavy, lots of waves, and the Wanda Fuca Straits, we renamed them the Wanda Puka Straits. And half of the people became sick and were lying in their beds. So that meant the other 4 of us had to do most all of the sailing, and the one guy was the cook. And so I took the time to study astronomy at that time because the heavens were just totally beautiful in a way that you don't normally see in cities. And anyways, we had bets a little after leaving the San Francisco latitude and heading west, and we made bets as to who could guess when we arrived. And I'd spent most of my money, so I could use the money that we were betting. And I was able to, I guessed that we would arrive on the winter solstice, which on that winter solstice, before we could see the land, we could smell the flowers because of the wind driving that fragrance out there. And sure enough, we arrived, and I got off there on the Big Island, and they kept kind of going. But just that if you have a goal and you see it clearly, then you can keep your hand on the rudder and maintain your confidence, because when you're sailing like that, especially a small vehicle, small vessel like this, in the middle of winter, the waves are tossing you, there's currents wanting to pull you in this direction. And then because you're heading into the wind, often you have to tack, you have to zigzag, you can't just go straight. And you need to have that goal always in mind. So in this case, it would be the Christ being, the archetype of the human being. And I think in one esoteric lecture, Steiner says, and this is this thing I was trying to say earlier, there's what they call spiritual economy. The spiritual beings don't value gold and silver and all of this, but they value transformed etheric bodies, transformed astral bodies, transformed egos. And this is what the Jesus being did, the Christ being did with the Jesus being. The Jesus being was really 2 beings, the Solomon side and the Nathan child. The Nathan child had never undergone the fall. So this was like a perfect human soul. And Steiner indicated that after the Christ worked to raise that soul even higher by imprinting the ego, the higher self into it with the help of the Buddha as part of the picture, that there are replicas of that transformed Nathan being waiting for each one of us in the spiritual world to become ripe to receive it. And so that's an aspiration we can kind of look towards, is this Jesus being that is sort of the human being that never fell. That means it's a human being that never divided into 2 sexes either. this is the being we're going to need the help with in the future for eugenic occultism, because we won't have a physical body forever. It's only for a limited period. And so anyways, that's sort of an occult secret that's worth pursuing in the light of spiritual economy, that there's replicas, not just of the ether body of the Christ, the astral body, the intellectual soul, mind soul, consciousness soul, but also these higher members of the spirit self, life spirit, spirit man. All of those were, the last three are the golden triangle that Christ gave to humanity and make it possible for us to achieve that future. So the deeper you go into this Christ mystery, the more that etherized blood of Christ can unite with the stream that moves from heart to head. And if we simultaneously carve out that hard stone, that's the gift of Lucifer through compassion, then we can be gifted with that golden aura of thinking sun thoughts. Rather, then we've got the power of Michael to set against these machines.
Okay, thank you so much, Florian. So Yaya, you have some questions, or maybe, I'll tell you, each your question will lead to another lecture from Florian.
I don't think so, because in a way, I consider what I'm going to say almost the conclusion to this wonderful meeting that we had. And I'm incredibly grateful to Florian for the wealth of wisdom that he's always ready to share with all of us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and share it, and I won't answer. I've said enough already.
No, I only wanted to add two things. One is based on your suggestion of antidotes. And one of the antidotes that we haven't mentioned, but is somehow always present, I'm sure, in the subconscious of everyone present, is the fact that we can and should, and hopefully do, support each other and love each other as a real community. Not just of anthroposophists, but of human beings in the highest sense of the word. And the second thing that I would like to add is that we should perhaps include creativity as one of the antidotes. Because whenever we develop and nurture our own creativity and then share it with others, we enrich the world with positive energy, if you like to call it that very simplistically, but also inspiring each other to be or attempt to become better human beings. So that's all from me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So, dear friends, so wow. Yeah, I mean, we've been working almost like 3 hours and a half. So, dear Florian, thank you so much from our community, which is present online, and from me personally, for your incredible presentation with all your intensity. I appreciate
you, Andre.
always did. So, dear friends, so lecture is recorded, so it will appear on K-Fold Mankind YouTube channel, so you can look at it in slow motion, by the way, by parts. Easier. So, and please say thank you and to Florian for his incredible work.
Thank you, Florian, and thank you, Andre, for
thank you,
Thank
Andre.
making this possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Andre, also. And thank you, Florian.
Thank you all very much.
Yes. Goodbye, dear friends.